Hi everyone, today we're talking about misplaced and dangling modifiers. In order to identify misplaced and dangling modifiers, we first need to understand what a modifier is. So make sure you have your notes ready and follow along so that you can fill in your blanks with the information that I provide to you. We're going to start with talking about the definition of a modifier. So what is a modifier? It's any word, clause, or phrase that describes another word, clause, or phrase, which is referred to as the target. So let's take a look at our example. It says, at the concert, Gary sang loudly. Here you can see that loudly is our modifier because it's describing. It's describing how Gary sang. And sang then would be referred to as our target. Simply put, the job of a modifier is to describe. Adjectives and adverbs are the parts of speech that typically describe. And we can have phrases that function as adjectives and adverbs, and we would call those modifiers as well. So where should the modifier be placed? Well, as we see in this example, the modifier is right next to the target, which is the correct place. So modifier should be next to the word or phrase they modify. The modifier could come right before or right after the word being described. Here, our modifier comes after the target. In another example, we can see down here that the modifier is coming before the target. It says, lying in Claire's yard, the puppy needed a rest after a long game of fetch. We can see that the puppy is the target because it's the word that's being described. Lying in Claire's yard is the phrase that is describing and telling us more information about the puppy. Let's move on to the idea of a misplaced modifier. Sometimes when authors are writing, they will put the modifier in the incorrect place. So we're going to take a look at an example of that in just a minute. When we look at the definition, a misplaced modifier is a modifier that is too far away from its target. Let's take a look at Glenn. Glenn took down the shutters, painting the house earlier. So we're looking here at this misplaced example. Glenn is our target, and we have this phrase, painting the house earlier, that's supposed to be the modifier that describes Glenn. However, when we look at the way that the sentence is written, we can see that painting the house earlier, the modifier, is describing Glenn, the target, but the placement of the modifier makes it sound like the shutters were painting instead of Glenn. In order to correct this mistake, I can fix this by move the modifier next to the intended target. So instead of having the modifier at the end of the sentence, I now want to move it closer to my target, which is Glenn. So here's the rewritten example in a correct format. It says, painting the house earlier, Glenn took down the shutters. Now we understand that Glenn took the shutters down, but Glenn was also the one painting the house. When you're fixing a misplaced modifier, you may need to add words or rewrite the sentence. Next, we're going to take a look at dangling modifiers. A dangling modifier means that a modifier that does not have a target. Sometimes writers will include modifiers or words or phrases that describe, but for some reason, In a dangling modifier, the writer did not include a target in the sentence. So let's take a look at an example. Here we have hungry. The leftover pizza was devoured. Hungry is one word. It's serving as our modifier, and it's describing. But notice we don't know what it's describing. The writer of this sentence left out the target. A rewrite of that sentence would look like this. Hungry, we devoured the leftover pizza. Now we can see that we are the ones that were hungry. Therefore, hungry, the modifier, is now describing we, the target. So how can I fix this? This can be fixed by rewriting the sentence to include the intended target, like in this example, when it was rewritten to include the word we. You may need to include additional words or even punctuation to change the sentence in order to correct the dangling modifier. Sometimes sentences can have misplaced modifiers and dangling modifiers at the same time. It could be the same word or even multiple words. You guys are going to do some practice with identifying modifiers and targets, as well as misplaced modifiers on no red ink. And you will also be completing an example packet with dangling modifiers as well as misplaced modifiers. If you have any additional questions, please make sure you see me for clarification.